Welcome to Signal Lantern, your beacon of freedom for the Northeast. I'm your host, Jason, and here with me today is absolutely nobody because I'm doing this by myself. I figured from time to time it is essential to do an episode with just me, given that I'm sort of the founder, the guy in charge of a lot of this stuff. My first episode I did this was 13 minutes. The second one was about George B. Cortelyou, so that one gets a pass. We'll see if I can fit up a 45-minute time slot. So, what I want to talk about today is going a little bit deeper about D.E.E.P, the very political philosophy which I kind of come up with. It's a framework for how I view things and how I want to operate, which I believe is the most effective. So please buckle on up, get ready, and let's jump right on in. As every listener, our 14 subscribers to this podcast know, New England is a different game. Not only is it a thing that we are a little bit towards outsiders, but it kind of just seems like Sisyphus pushing that boulder up a hill for it to roll right on back down. And there's a lot of reasons for this. One, again, New England is a pretty self-contained community, a self-contained region. If someone from Texas comes on up, we're not going to be too warm and welcoming to them necessarily because, especially if they're trying to knock for political causes, what do you know? You're not one of us. I think a lot of national organizations have tried to bridge that gap. Tried being the key word. Because there are incentives that I believe, of no fault of their own, that prevent any one person on behalf of a national organization to actually make effective leeway. First and foremost is donors. A lot of donors take an attitude that New England isn't worth our time or money. It's not winnable, and therefore, put your money into the swing states in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. And yeah, that's fair. I can understand their perspective. It is impossible to win, but I don't care. We're going to make it possible. So, national organization is not the way. Of the organizations locally that do exist, there doesn't seem to be a concentrated big tent effort. A lot of the things are very siloed. There are a bunch of organizations for one or two particular issues, and there's a bunch of mini organizations, but by and large, there really isn't one thing where you can look at it and be like, well, that's the New England thing. That's something that has such prominence and name value where people kind of just instinctively associate the two together. And so, since there isn't really a concentrated effort that has been effective, we've kind of just been left to the wolves. And I'm not talking about, oh, it's just progressive, right? A lot of people will fall into that trap and think that I'm making a critique that, oh, I'm just anti-progressive. It's not even that, because both liberal and conservative organizations have had trouble making leeway in New England. And so there has to be a different approach. An approach that completely bypasses the idea that, oh, we're unfixable. You've been progressive for decades and there's been corruption and just things have been going downhill in this general sense of decline. There is a solution, but it is difficult and worth it. And so let me tell you about Ernest Shackleton. Ernest Shackleton was the first person to try to explore Antarctica. I can't pronounce that, but the continent on the world which has no bears, I believe, or it was the North one. Regardless, it's really cold in where Ernest Shackleton wanted to go. but he needed a crew of volunteers to help him explore. And so he allegedly posts in this newspaper, "Men wanted for hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger. Safe return doubtful. Honor and recognition in event of success." Now, this newspaper almost certainly was apocryphal. No one has been able to find the exact source behind it. However, there is a reason it lives on in copywriting history, because it calls to a higher sense of, this is the difficult thing, but we're going to do it, and honor and recognition in event of success. And that brings me to my framework. I've made it an acronym because acronyms are catchy and easily remembered. DEEP: duty, endurance, excellence, prudence. And instead of just saying the acronym and moving on, I'm going to actually go individually. Start with duty. Yes, I know. Haha, I said duty. Get that out of the way. It's important. We're having a serious conversation, okay? We should get a spray bottle. I recently read a book by the title of Failure Disrupted. Failure Disrupted was a book by Johnny Garman. Johnny Garman was a man that I met at a Leadership Institute meeting in Arlington, Virginia at their headquarters. He had started really poor and made I believe it was a 8-figure organization in healthcare. Basically, he had started with not a lot of money and brought this organization up. And so this book is his framework for how to be successful. I'm not going to go through the entire framework. I do recommend the book. It's pretty good. Shout out Johnny Garman. But there is one thing that he said that kind of stuck with me, that made me think and made me dig deeper. No pun intended. He had said something along the lines of, throughout all of my years, as I've grown and I've matured, I have learned that people generally are motivated by that old adage that rings true, either towards the pursuit of pleasure or against the pursuit of pain. Either avoid suffering or get pleasure. And I thought about that. What motivates me? And I'm like, well, it's not quite pleasure, because if I think about it, the pleasure for me is growing old, seeing the fruits of my labor, being a 90-year-old man and still doing this, having a study with the floor to ceiling bookshelves and one of those ladders that roll, as well as like 12 kids. That's the American dream for me. But that's not like pleasure. That's not drugs, sex, and rock and roll. That's boring by most people's standards, but it's, the type of thing that's sort of my end goal. So when it's, oh, you have to go towards an incentive, I'm not really going towards the incentive that most people would. And if I knew for a fact that I would die penniless and without that, I'd still do it anyways. Which is interesting, because the opposite is against the pursuit of pain. And if you're trying to avoid suffering, this job is not the one you would go into. I mean, I know that this is backbreaking, thankless work for like 10 years. But what I keep coming back to is, I am going to suffer so that my children don't have to. So I will deliberately put myself through pain in order for higher purpose. And so I thought about this and admittedly talked to ChatGPT. I know that's a common thing, but just as an external processor. And it said, what you're describing here is teleological motivation. What is that? Well, it's telos plus logos. Telos, I'm forgetting the why, but the logos is logic, and telos, I think, is the ultimate why. And that was first, I'm going to butcher this, I think it might have been Plato. But then St. Thomas Aquinas took that and dug a little deeper and said, it's God. That's the ultimate end goal. The teleological end goal of something, St. Thomas Aquinas for each individual person is God, but as Plato was describing it, you could even describe it like a water bottle, right? This is a really silly metaphor that I'm making up on the spot, but bear with me. The ultimate goal of this water bottle right here is to keep me, Jason, hydrated. That is the teleological end of that water bottle, to store 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen. All right. And so I'm not, if I'm not motivated by pleasure and I'm not trying to avoid pain, then teleological motivation is what motivates me and what I think ought to motivate you. That every person should find their teleological why. Also on duty is first principles. I have long said that the Constitution is one of the most genius, if not the most genius political documents out there. I'm not just saying that as patriotic, like, oh, America. No, no, no. Like, you got to think about how revolutionary it was. The separation of powers, the legislative branch being the one that makes the laws, and 2 bicameral houses, a house which is by population and a senate which is, fixed by the state. It goes against, if the whims of the people just want to go, the senate is meant to be, okay, hold on now. Senate is trying to be prudent, which is the final one here. But then there's, the executive branch. And then there's the independent judiciary. Now, all of this was based off of our very own Massachusetts Constitution in 1780 was when it was ratified, and John Adams was the guy who wrote that. And so each of those things have the separation of powers, and not just the separation of powers, but also checks and balances between. And so this is a very interesting way that it had aspects of monarchy in the executive, oligarchy in legislative, and or a democracy in the legislative, and like oligarchy with the Supreme Court. And they all had checks on each other, and it's just genius. I'm not just history buffing out about this. It really is. And so I think the legal theory that we ought to be going towards is asking, okay, Constitution, what did they mean when they wrote this? And that has been championed by, I believe, Antonin Scalia. And so when I'm talking about the Constitution and what we're trying to keep, what we're trying to shine that light of a signal lantern, it's that. There are people in both parties who have fealty to the Constitution, and that is what we owe our duty to. Another tangent I will go on here is that I was thinking about citizenship, civic duties, civic rights, civic responsibilities. Back then, the founders had tied the civic rights that you get, the right to vote, the right to that. There are certain things that we all get, but then there's also responsibilities that you have. So you have to sign up for the draft if you want the right to vote. And so that view of citizenship has been, I think, lost, but it is also an important one. Again, look at what the founders meant when they said certain things, and that is what we should also be going towards. The next in our acronym is endurance. This is one I really want to talk about and go a lot, because I believe endurance is one of the missing pieces that have really slowed down a lot of progress that could have happened. This is built into the very fabric of our Keepers movement. Endurance is what kind of sets us all aside because we're not looking for a movement that skyrockets up and has a flash in the pan. We want the people who are going to stay. The people that when it gets rough, they're going to plant their feet in the ground and do what it takes to win. And I think a critique I'd like to make is a lot of youth politics and national and other levels, they recognize an issue. The issue is that it's a movement that has a high turnover rate, that people will go into the movement wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, and then leave. And so their attitude is to say, oh, it's fun. Politics is fun. Being a conservative, that's great. We love that. That's the fun thing to do, which, don't get me wrong, Andrew Breitbart, politics is downstream from culture. If you got to make conservatism fun in order for people to want to join, but you can't do that in a vacuum. And I think the approach that a lot of people take is to make it like a giant party, not a political party, but like a rave with, a DJ and, bright lights and flashy showmanship, pyrotechnics. I do love a good pyrotechnic show, by the way. I'm not criticizing that. I'm criticizing doing that and that alone. Because inevitably, the realm of politics is something that is difficult, is something that requires action. And to inspire people into action, the approach of, oh, it's fun, it's really fun, it gets short bursts of explosive, militant intensity. But what it doesn't do is create a crowd, a populace, who will stay when it gets rough. And that is why endurance is key to our movement and why it is built into the very fabric of everything that we are doing. I don't give a crap about all of the people that we could be getting in if we straight up lied to their faces and said, this is going to be fun. It is my duty, going back to the first one, duty, endurance, excellence, prudence, it all builds on each other. It is my duty to be upfront with them and to say, you know what, this isn't for the weak. This isn't for the faint of heart. If you're not okay with backbreaking, thankless work, then it's okay if you don't think this is for you. Ultimately, there's a way kind of to separate the wheat from the chaff. And the bet that I am making is that you find the really committed people who are willing to stand by something when it's a losing battle, when it's an uphill battle, when all of the odds are against you. Those are the people that I want. Because I'm that type of person. I'm the type of person that looks at a state as blue as Massachusetts and says, you know what? I'm going to do something about it. I am going to elect constitutionally minded people to this place that hasn't seen the Constitution since Calvin Coolidge. Let's be real here. And so I keep harping on endurance because that is the one thing I feel like is missing. And so above all else, I want to make sure that we can get the people that can endure. Because without those people, you're not going to see action that lasts. You need people that last to get changes that last. Next is excellence. Excellence is having high standards for oneself, holding yourself to a high benchmark. It's meritocracy in action. Being the best you can at the gifts and talents that God has granted upon you. Excellence is a tricky thing to define, but you know it when you see it. I have some very excellent people behind me. Charlie Kirk, George B. Cortelyou. They were all firing on all cylinders at their craft. And so when I think about excellence, I think about not just holding ourselves to the highest of standards, but also bringing other people up along with us. And creating a culture of excellence is something I think about all the time. How am I going to make sure that the people involved are not just caring about it, but also acting in the best way possible? The attitude that I have here on excellence is most adequately mapped to how I view learning. Learning is not something that ends when you leave the classroom with um, all of the graduation chords, A pluses, and, summa cum laude and all of that stuff. Or even if it's a trade school, learning is a lifelong endeavor. It never ends. And thus, it is something that can always be improved upon. So never become the Dunning-Kruger effect incarnate. Never be satisfied with, oh, you know what, I'm just okay, I'm at the top of my game. No, you're not. There's always more things you can learn. Similarly, in every possible field you can think of, from event planning to snow shoveling, to shoemaking, to music production, to car manufacturing. And I'm shamelessly looking around things for objects in my room to think about this. But point being is that meritocracy is the ruthless pursuit of betterment. Every person has gifts given to them by God Almighty, and it is our duty to endure to become excellent. I've said this a lot. You are the ambassador of your worldview. For me, that is very important. I must be articulate and compassionate and faithful to my worldview to any person I'm talking to. Because perhaps that is the only time that they are ever going to encounter that worldview. Perhaps I am the one person who, instead of seeing a caricature on social media, I'm the real person standing in front of them that will actually be able to plant a seed that, hey, you know what? Hey, maybe all of the people with this worldview aren't bad, because he isn't. I know him and I like him. Happened a lot in college. And so I view it as my solemn responsibility to be excellent in academics, in speaking, in knowing my crap, because who knows what sort of impact that is going to have on somebody else. Hopefully a good one. The last thing in D.E.E.P is prudence. Now, this one is a very interesting term because it's very misunderstood. That's how I would describe it. A lot of people, oh, you're a prude. It's seen as a pejorative because, oh, being a prude, you're standoffish, you're not engaging, and that's sort of a vestige of our hedonistic culture. But that's not really related. It's similar roots, and I'm sure I could go in the etymology of all of that and find some common connection with a root word. But prudence defined is wisdom in action. So it isn't just acting and just doing stuff and throwing crap at the wall to see what sticks. No. Prudence is doing the right thing and thinking about the results. Now, there is a common misconception I've thought about that, oh, prudence, that just means not doing stuff. That means inaction. That means waiting forever. And admittedly, one of my faults is that I will get too much in my head. I will think about stuff to the point where I'm not acting. And that's why I have Remy and Matt to kick me in the butt and say, all right, get moving. We make a team. But prudence is very, very essential to everything we're doing. Because what good is action or rash action if it does not have the intended effect, if it does not have the follow through? So here's an example of prudence, so I can sort of illustrate this. Is when I was in school, one of my foundational things is I sued my student government, or rather, I had a legal demand letter sent to them. And I remember that at the time I was trying to get my club started. I was chapter president for Turning Point USA, and I was led to believe that I had everything all set. I did the Constitution. I did all of the steps. It was really just a kangaroo court, though, that, oh, we're going to make you think that way. But they had decided long, long before I had even stepped in the picture, yeah, you guys aren't having a place here. So they denied us. They denied our club and said, yeah, no, for safety reasons, which is bullcrap. For safety reasons, you cannot be club. Wow. Now, what I could have done, and what I know they wanted me to do, is to be like, you guys aren't student government, you guys are student tyranny, and the right of the all government gets from the consent of the governed, and I do not give my consent to you, and then just start going off on them and getting angry. But you know what they would do? You know what they would have done? They would have turned around and see, he is a bad guy, just like we said. See how grateful you should be, student body, that we didn't let someone like this have a club? And I saw that one from a mile away. So the prudent thing to do wasn't to make a fit about it. Rather, it was to silently collect all of the ways they had messed with me and infringed upon my constitutional rights into a document, color code that document, and then send it out into a legal team. That legal team sent a legal demand letter, and the student government came up with an appeals process really quick. An appeals process that didn't exist prior. And that's one of my, I don't want to say crowning achievements in college, but whenever someone looks at the student government constitution and they see Article 9, Special Committee on Club Appeals, they can know that I was I was the one who did that, because I stood up and I didn't fall into the trap of I'm just gonna be mad. I took every diplomatic option available to me until there was no more, and then I saw the higher option. That was the prudent thing to do. I had people in my corner, people from Turning Point, people all around me saying, "Jason, like, what, you should just, go on a scorched earth campaign, and you should go to the media and try to." I'm like, no, 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 no. We're not going to play that game. We're not going to go to war in that way. You have to be prudent in everything you do. Huge shout out to my dear friend Victor Nieves. He is now president of Life Issues Institute. His book, entitled Conservative Prudence, really talks about this and gives practical tips on how to do this. This isn't a paid advertisement. I just thought everyone should know. Conservative Prudence, very good book. Please read it. Send some support to my boy Vic. So, all of this duty, endurance, excellence, prudence, it brings me back to, why are we the Keepers movement? Now, by this, there's, I say a larger movement, but there's a few separate legal entities. Currently, as it exists, there's a 501c4, Keepers of the Revolution, a political action committee PAC called Project Revere, and this show, which is an independent show for just me and the other people, Matt and Remy, to express their personal viewpoints. They're also forthcoming potentially, when I can handle it. I'd like to start a 501c3 Keepers Academy to talk a lot about these very high-minded intellectual things about history and philosophy and Roscoe Conkling and George B. Cortelyou and uh, examples of patriots past, present, so that way we can create the patriots of the future. Well, Patriots lost the Super Bowl. I'm not even a football person, and yeah, the defensive line, ugh, or offensive line, we got our quarterback tackled too much. Sorry, that was a huge off topic, but I'm keeping it in because the philosophy of Signal Lantern is everything is unedited and raw, so you get this along with the ride. Benjamin Franklin, when coming out of the Constitutional Convention, was asked, "What type of government have we been given? Democracy, a republic, a monarchy?" He says, "A republic, if you can keep it." So, what exactly are we trying to keep? What are we keeping? Republic by the people, or of the people, by the people, and for the people. The founders fought a bloody revolution so that we don't have to. I'm going to say that again. The founders fought a bloody revolution so that we don't have to. When I say keepers of the revolution, I'm not talking about the process of revolution, the battles and the bloodshed, and no, I'm talking about the result. We were given the Constitution, which I spent a few minutes back there praising as one of the most beautiful political documents in history. We were given the ability to peaceably settle our differences, to petition our government for redress of grievances, to have the separation of powers, to elect people to represent us that actually represent us. We are not a tyranny. We are not a monarchy. We are not an oligarchy. We're not even a democracy. We are a representative republic that has vestiges of democracy, but it's really just this hodgepodge. Like, I always hear this argument of, oh, it's a republic, oh, it's a democracy. It's kind of everything. And that's the genius of it. It has little parts of everything. And that's the beauty of our Constitution. And so we are keeping that Constitution. It gave us the ability to talk and to peaceably settle our differences. Matt had spoke about this when I had him on, that there are 4 boxes of liberty. The first box is the soapbox, hear ye, where we get to speak freely. The second is the ballot box, where we elect representatives and we elect the president. But even down, vote for library trustee, vote for your town level offices. That is a huge part of what we are trying to do. Then the third box of liberty is the jury box with lawsuits. I had to open that third box in college, but ideally we would not like to have to do that. The fourth and final box is the ammo box, where open rebellion occurs, and that is what we want to avoid. That is the exact thing that the founders did, so we don't have to. And my fear, ever since Charlie died, ever since all of this, is that we are heading towards something that we cannot take back. We are crossing the Rubicon, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that we don't have to open that fourth box, that we don't have to fight. The revolution is not of guns. The revolution is of spirit and of speech and of ideas. Every other box is on the table. The soapbox, the jury box, the ballot box, but for God's sakes, we do not want to open that fourth box. I want to create an environment where that doesn't happen. And so, back in the beginning, I was talking about all of these issues about New England. I'm not going to be the hopium guy and say, rah, rah, everything is fun. I spent some time criticizing that. But it's not hopeless. It's resolve that I'm asking for. I'm asking you to be the remnant. Now, there's a man by the name of Nick Freitas. Nick Freitas is a very good man, actually. One of my, second to Charlie, contemporary political people who I enjoy and who I share a worldview with. Nick Freitas was a uh, Green Beret and was a member of the Virginia House of Delegates for about 10 years. At one point, there was a paperwork kerfluffle where he had to be a write in candidate, and he won against an incumbent. It was literally just on the ballot was incumbent name, or sorry, not incumbent, his challenger, a Democrat, and then blank. Like he wasn't even on the ballot, and he won with like 60 something percent of the vote. I think one of the things he did was pass out pens with his name on it and how to spell it, because it's a unique name. Frei, it breaks the I before E rule, I'm pretty sure. But anyways, really good guy, and host of the Making the Argument podcast, where him, Christian Hines, his wife Tina, really good show. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. A lot of shout outs today. Johnny Garman, Victor Nieves, and Nick Freitas. But a while ago, several years, there was a episode he went about of should you leave your state, and he gave all of these criteria about these are things that if this criteria is matched, it might be good to leave your state. Now he was talking about blue states going to red states. He also mentioned about it was like locusts versus I forget the other term, but the people who bring their politics with them and be a drain on the system, or the people who leave recognize why they're leaving and say I want to be a part of the state. He said if you move to a state, be the person who actually is grateful for it, not the person who comes and don't California my Texas. But I find myself in the darndest of situations because a week or two ago I actually met him, which is very interesting. So I had went to the March for Life in this year 2026, and afterwards Remy and I, well, Remy had tickets to their convention that they had. I did not. So I was waiting in the hotel lobby, and he was there, and I saw him and I spoke with him for a few minutes. And I have notes, so I'm going to open this up and read verbatim what I had said, because I specifically want to I specifically wanted to remember it. I said, just met VA House of Delegates member Nick Freitas. Mentioned his episode on whether to stay or leave, and I told him about my plans for Massachusetts. Towards the end, he had mentioned, quote, God called some people to leave and some people to be the remnant to build upon. I said, admittedly, it's a cross to bear, but he told me to keep the faith as he was leaving. The interaction was brief but good, and I got to take a photo with him. Now, clearly he was a busy man, but he, took time out of his, schedule to meet with me, and it was different guy in person than on the podcast. It kind of caught him off guard. He was in the middle of something, but interestingly enough, a few days ago, or I believe the most recent episode of Making the Argument, I listened to it this morning, was a redo of the Blue State Dilemma, Should You Leave Your State episode. And this time there was something different. He said the same criteria roughly as before. He didn't mention the locust thing. But one of the things he said towards the end is, if you are called to stay in your state, if God calls you to stay in your state, you should be a remnant, even if all of these criteria have been met. And everything is telling you that you should leave your state. Sometimes you know the risks, you've seen all of this, and you still want to stay nonetheless. I would like to think that after our conversation where he said about being the remnant, it stuck with him and he re released that episode. But it could be a variety of things. Regardless of this, I'm a remnant. I have put my stake in the ground here that I am not going to leave anything short of hot civil war, and even then it's debatable. I'm sending out my signal lantern to everybody else. I challenge you. You can make a difference. You don't have to move out of this state. We can see a rebirth of freedom, and you can be a part of it. Everything isn't hopeless. No matter what everyone else outside of New England says, we know, not just hope, not just believe, we resolve and we know that there is hope. Not hopium, but us, the remnant, it is our solemn responsibility to stay. And I'm calling everyone else here who might be thinking about getting up and moving somewhere else in despair. You know what? I can't change this. I can't make any difference. Stop. You can, and you will. New England is a unique beast, yes. But that also means it requires a unique solution, one I think I've tackled here. If we stay loyal to our duty, to endure our way towards excellence, and to be prudent, I believe that it may not be so hopeless a battle as people may think it is. That this self-defeating attitude is a handicap that we did to ourselves, but we can just as easily choose to resolve. That through small wages, bitter cold, long months of darkness, safe return doubtful, there is honor and recognition in event of success. That doing the hard thing is doing the right thing. And I hope, no, I resolve to do the right thing. And I want people to join. So I challenge all of you, keepers, not to fall for the lie that we don't have a say. We all have the ability to impact our little corner of the world. For me, it's, the town of Weymouth in Abington, or shout out to Matt. Matt has been doing a really good job there. I'm not even going to take credit to that. That's all him, Matt. If you're listening to this, kudos, buddy. And so I would say, in short, it's not flashy, it's not sexy, but it's effective. And it is the way that we are going to spark a revival, the way forward. Not by rash action, but by prudent, responsible, thoughtful deliberation and doing the right thing, especially when it is difficult. Keep the hope, keep the flame, and don't forget to spread the signal. I've been Jason. Thank you very much for watching.